Magic Johnson and Larry Bird remain two of the most influential figures in NBA history, and their careers almost feel like two sides of the same legendary story. They played for rival franchises, constantly challenged one another, and helped transform professional basketball into a global phenomenon. Before the massive endorsement deals, heated GOAT arguments, and endless comparisons, they were simply two young superstars who refused to let the other gain an advantage for too long. Every MVP race, championship run, major milestone, and memorable performance seemed even more significant because there was always another legend waiting to respond. If Magic delivered an incredible season, Bird found a way to answer, and if Bird produced another unforgettable performance, Magic was never far behind. That competitive tension became one of the defining forces of their era. Magic, standing 6'9", completely changed the perception of what a point guard could be, using his size, vision, creativity, and extraordinary passing ability to turn fast breaks into must-see entertainment. Bird was almost the opposite stylistically, but just as devastating, controlling games with elite shooting, basketball intelligence, toughness, and a confidence that could make opponents uncomfortable before the game was even decided. Their greatness was not simply about the championships they collected, but about the standard they established for everyone who came after them. Former players still talk about competing against Magic and Bird because facing either one meant dealing with a player capable of changing the entire course of a game. Isaiah Thomas experienced that reality firsthand, battling both superstars during one of the most competitive periods in NBA history. From his perspective, Magic and Bird were more than two elite players competing for individual recognition. They were forces that pushed an entire generation of basketball players to become better. Every matchup carried enormous importance, every playoff series felt like an event, and every performance seemed to raise the expectations surrounding the league. Their rivalry created a level of excitement that extended beyond the court, bringing new fans into the sport and helping establish the NBA as a worldwide entertainment powerhouse. Players weren't simply trying to win games during that era. They were trying to reach the extraordinary standard that Magic and Bird had created, and that relentless competition became a major part of what made their careers so unforgettable. To Isaiah Thomas, Magic Johnson and Larry Bird represented much more than two players who collected championships. They helped redefine the way basketball was played, watched, and understood around the world. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar had the unique opportunity to experience Magic's greatness from the same locker room and saw firsthand how his leadership could completely transform a team. Magic had an incredible ability to read the floor, anticipate where teammates would be, and create opportunities without forcing the offense. He made everyone around him feel involved, turning unselfish basketball into one of the Lakers' greatest strengths. Kareem also had enormous respect for Larry Bird, especially after battling him on the biggest stages. Bird's shooting, passing, toughness, intelligence, and competitive fire made him one of the most difficult opponents Kareem ever encountered. To Kareem, Bird possessed a natural understanding of the game that separated him from most players, particularly when the pressure reached its highest point. Shaquille O'Neal came into the NBA after Magic and Bird's greatest battles had already passed, but he grew up watching both legends and later joined the Lakers franchise that Magic had helped turn into a basketball powerhouse. Shaq understood that Magic's greatness wasn't based on physical dominance alone. At 6'9", Magic could have relied on his size, but instead he controlled games with vision, creativity, decision-making, and extraordinary passing. He made the offense flow, consistently found teammates in the right positions, and seemed to understand the game several moves ahead. That style gave Shaq an even greater appreciation for how unique Magic was as a player and leader. Shaq also admired Bird for completely different reasons. Bird's greatest weapon wasn't always his athletic ability, it was his mentality. He played with tremendous confidence, embraced difficult matchups, competed through pain, and never seemed intimidated by the biggest stage. That relentless attitude was something Shaq deeply respected because he brought a similar competitive edge to his own career. Yet when the discussion turned specifically toward leadership and the identity of the Lakers, Magic remained incredibly difficult to separate from the franchise's history. For Shaq, Magic proved that controlling a basketball game isn't always about overpowering opponents physically. Sometimes the greatest influence comes from seeing the floor differently, trusting your teammates, making the right decision, and creating an environment where everyone around you becomes better.
For me, it would have to be Magic Johnson, because if you look at the traditional point guard, they've always been not small, but smaller. You know, Magic was the first oversized guy that excelled at being a point guard. You know, he actually gave Chris and myself the confidence to be able to get the ball, take it off the glass, and go. I actually used to hate Larry Bird. I hated him.
Because, why?
I mean, because, well, not hate him. I was sort of like, jealous of him because he was a regular guy that did everything. He shouted in your face. He had to fade away. One time, I was watching a game. They was playing somebody, and I was betting this guy, and he was falling out of bounds, and he shot that thing over the backboard and it went. And I was like, I thought most of what he did was luck. But as I, got older and kept watching, I just knew that it was skill. And, for him to even have his name mentioned in this category with Magic and Michael Jordan just shows how...
Steve Smith entered the NBA just as the legendary Bird Magic era was winding down, but the influence those two superstars had built was impossible to miss. Smith saw the final stages of their careers firsthand and then spent years competing against players who had studied and modeled their games after those two icons. When he watched Larry Bird, however, the thing that stood out most wasn't simply the scoring numbers or statistics. It was Bird's incredible calmness under pressure. Bird always seemed to be one step ahead of everyone else, reading the court before the play even developed and understanding exactly where he needed to be. He rarely appeared rushed, rarely forced a difficult decision, and never seemed overwhelmed by the importance of the moment. Instead, he patiently waited for the right opportunity and then executed with remarkable precision. For a guard like Smith, whose own game relied heavily on timing, positioning, angles, and intelligent decision-making, watching Bird operate at that level provided a powerful lesson. Bird showed that controlling a game wasn't always about moving faster or playing louder. Sometimes it was about seeing the situation earlier than everyone else and making the correct decision before the defense could react. That combination of patience, confidence, and basketball intelligence left a lasting impression on Smith and helped explain why Bird's influence continued long after his playing career was over.
But just to talk about Larry, for me to see the guy who can shoot the basketball, but then also be able to change his game up, but to do whatever he had to do to win. Kind of like Magic, kind of like Michael, but, I was impressed for a guy with his athletic ability, which was not a lot, to be able to rebound the basketball, to really take the fundamentals of the game and take it to another level. I mean, everything fundamentally, if you watch Larry Bird, he did at a top level. I mean, but if I had to pick, because I started my team always with a center and a point guard. So taking nothing away from Michael. We all know he's the greatest player, but if I'm gonna start my guy with a team with a point guard or a center, I have to go with Magic Johnson, because now I can plug any 2, 3, 4, 5 with a Magic Johnson and we'll have a...
As Steve Smith's career progressed, his appreciation for Magic Johnson only became stronger because he realized just how much Magic had changed the expectations for a leader playing on the perimeter. Magic wasn't simply a superstar who could fill up the stat sheet. He was the type of player a franchise could confidently build around because his presence gave the entire team structure and direction. Possessions looked more organized. Teammates played with greater confidence, and the offense seemed to develop a natural rhythm whenever Magic was controlling the action. Smith respected Larry Bird just as much, but for different reasons. Bird was one of the most intelligent and mentally tough competitors Smith had ever studied, a player who could slow the game down, make the correct decision under pressure, and deliver when the stakes were highest. He rarely wasted movement and seemed to recognize opportunities before defenders even realized they were available. Even with that enormous respect for Bird, Smith ultimately leaned toward Magic when considering which player he would choose to build a franchise around. To Smith, Magic offered an extraordinary combination of talent, leadership, basketball intelligence, and the ability to make everyone around him better. Phil Jackson never had the opportunity to coach either Magic or Bird, but his preparation for facing them gave him a unique perspective on their greatness. As one of basketball's most respected strategic minds, Jackson understood that defeating Bird required almost perfect attention to detail. Bird wasn't simply a great scorer. He was a master at exploiting defensive mistakes, using positioning, timing, movement without the ball, and anticipation to create advantages. A defender could do everything correctly for most of a possession and still find himself punished for one tiny mistake. Bird recognized defensive breakdowns almost instantly and had the skill to turn those small openings into major scoring opportunities. Against a player like Bird, there was no room to relax because the smallest lapse in concentration could completely change the outcome of the possession.
Larry Bird, Magic Johnson.
Wow. Well, Magic's got a post-up game. Larry had a good post-up game too, but Larry was an outside step-back shooter. He had a great shot. And I think I'd probably go with Larry. He's probably the better one.
Is that what you wanted to hear?
What did I say? I knew Larry.
Phil Jackson respected how little room Larry Bird needed to completely change the direction of a game. One clean look, one perfectly balanced jumper, or one smart pass could suddenly swing the momentum, and Bird played with the kind of confidence that never seemed forced. He didn't need to constantly announce himself. He simply seemed to expect that he would make the right play when the pressure arrived, and he regularly delivered. Magic Johnson presented a completely different challenge. Defenses weren't simply preparing for one particular move or scoring option, because Magic's greatest weapon was his ability to control the entire flow of the game. His passing, court vision, size, and understanding of spacing allowed him to organize the Lakers' offense and make every possession feel purposeful. From Jackson's perspective, Bird could overwhelm an opponent by punishing every defensive mistake with his scoring and playmaking, while Magic could gradually take control of an entire game until the opposing team suddenly realized it had lost command. Both superstars demanded constant attention, but they created problems in completely different ways. Chris Webber entered the NBA after Bird and Magic had already left the spotlight, yet their influence remained deeply embedded in the league. Webber studied their games not simply for the spectacular highlights, but to understand the habits and decisions that made them so successful for so long. Larry Bird particularly caught his attention because Bird's greatness wasn't dependent on explosive athleticism or highlight reel plays. His game was built around intelligence, timing, positioning, anticipation, and consistently making the smartest decision available. Webber admired that approach because Bird seemed far more interested in winning than in receiving attention for individual moments. The more film Webber watched, the more he noticed how Bird constantly made opponents uncomfortable. His movement without the ball, precise passing, positioning, and ability to read defensive tendencies often made it seem as though he understood what the defense was going to do before the defenders themselves had fully committed to their decisions.
And when I think of Magic Johnson, if I'm starting my team with the point guard that sat in the captain's chair and played center in every position in the game in the championship, there's no way I'm going against Magic. I have help defenders that can probably help. You look at all these guys are great, but you look at the first few years of all these guys, they all had great Hall of Famers, and maybe Mike didn't have that in the beginning. But to me, the one thing is Magic, being the leader that he is. One thing that is, maybe it is up for question, but Magic to me in the history of the game is one of the best leaders from what you've seen in his getting people energized, getting the crowd energized, the style of play. You ever notice when they scored how fast Magic Johnson got the ball up to half court? Those are showtime things, but you're setting up the play with 20 seconds on the clock. And just him getting everybody involved, knowing what...
Magic Johnson taught Chris Webber a completely different side of greatness. As a big man who also loved creating for teammates, Webber was fascinated by how effortlessly Magic kept an offense moving. Magic could take complicated situations, process them almost instantly, and turn them into simple scoring opportunities for the people around him. Watching him helped Webber understand that leadership wasn't simply about being the team's biggest scorer. It was about making every possession better and giving teammates confidence to play at their highest level. To Webber, Bird was the player opponents feared because of his efficiency, preparation, discipline, and ability to punish even the smallest mistake, while Magic was the superstar teammates naturally wanted to follow because he could control so many parts of the game without making it look difficult. Choosing between them was almost impossible for Webber because each represented a different kind of greatness, and his preference ultimately depended on the type of personality and leadership style he wanted at the center of a team. Paul Pierce also grew up surrounded by the legacy of Magic and Bird, and by the time he entered the NBA, both names had already become permanent parts of basketball history. Pierce never had the opportunity to face either legend during his prime, but their influence was still visible throughout the league, especially in the way players approached the game. Bird's style connected with Pierce on a deeper level because of the patience, footwork, confidence, and basketball intelligence that allowed him to create opportunities without depending entirely on explosive athleticism. As Pierce developed into the leader of the Celtics, he increasingly appreciated the lessons Bird had demonstrated years earlier. Bird showed that greatness wasn't always about being the fastest or jumping the highest. Sometimes it came from understanding angles, reading the defense, staying composed, and consistently arriving in the right place at the right moment. That emphasis on basketball IQ, patience, and decision-making became an important part of the way Pierce approached his own career.